His military ID hit the ground. The officer kicked it like trash. A bike like that? Where'd you steal it from? No warrant. No crime. Just a black man riding a shiny motorcycle. Cuffed. Bleeding. On a quiet country road. But what they didn't know, the man they were humiliating was the father of a U.S. Army captain. And 30 minutes later, 20 Humvees rolled through town. What state are you in? Would your local police know the difference between a threat and a hero? Let's begin the story that stunned America. Second by second, injustice by injustice. The early autumn sunlight poured through the old oak trees lining North Ridge Parkway, casting honey-colored streaks across the pavement. The morning mist hadn't yet lifted, drifting like thin smoke above the fields outside Wexleyboro, Georgia. A brisk wind swept through, carrying the scent of dry grass and damp soil. The sky stretched wide and cloudless, one of those perfect days for anyone who loved the solitude of the open road. And that was exactly why Colonel Raymond Elias Ford, age 74, had been up before dawn. His 1986 Harley-Davidson Road King rumbled to life like a waking beast, its low growl echoing to the small garage in Glenfield Heights, a quiet community of veterans a few miles from town. The bike had been a farewell gift from his unit more than 30 years ago, and ever since, every Sunday morning, he rode it down the familiar country roads, a private ritual. A chestnut-brown leather jacket hugged his still solid frame. A full-face helmet concealed his neatly cropped silver hair. No medals, no insignia, no obvious signs that this man had once commanded hundreds of soldiers, except for one, the calm presence of someone who had walked through fire and lived. He left the house at 7:12 a.m. His daughter, Captain Desiree Holloway, had called the night before. "Dad, I know you like your peace and quiet, but I don't feel safe with you riding through places like Sycamore Crest alone." He just chuckled. "I was riding these roads before they even had names." On the straight stretch leading to Hillstone Crossing Bridge, Raymond felt the wind against the handlebars like memories rushing back. 30 years in uniform, 5 deployments, a Medal of Honor he'd never hung on any wall. To him, this stillness, this moment, was a real reward. But he didn't know that this Sunday morning would be unlike any he had ever lived. Up ahead, beneath a faded real estate billboard, a patrol car sat tucked in the shade. Inside, Officer Matthew Taylor, 39, leaned back in his seat, holding a lukewarm cup of coffee. Next to him, Officer Jalen Reddick, 29, scrolled through a list of recent motorcycle thefts on the dashboard computer. "You see that?" Taylor muttered, eyes fixed on the side mirror. "Over there, old Harley, black paint, shiny as hell. That bike's worth more than what some old man makes in a year. And the way he's riding, that ain't one of us." Reddick hesitated. No reason to stop him. He's going the speed limit. Plate's legit. Not swerving. "Call it cop instinct," Taylor growled, stepping on the gas and switching lanes. "A bike like that in Sycamore Crest? I want to know where he got it." Up ahead, Raymond had no idea what was coming. Behind him, the red and blue lights flared to life, and with them came a familiar chill, rushing in fast like the wind. The flashing lights danced in the side mirror of the 1986 Road King. Colonel Raymond Elias Ford didn't speed up, didn't look back. He signaled right, calmly pulling into a patch of open dirt beneath the Hillstone Crossing Bridge. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, like a drill he'd rehearsed 100 times in the service. Because he knew one thing. A black man, alone on a quiet road, when stopped by police, every second becomes a survival test. Inside the patrol car, Officer Matthew Taylor killed the siren, but left the engine running low and growling. He didn't say a word to Reddick, just unlatched the strap on his sidearm and opened the door. "Be careful," Reddick warned. "He hasn't done anything wrong." Taylor didn't answer. His face was locked in that familiar scowl, the kind of look worn by a man who had already decided he was right, even when all the evidence said otherwise. "Keep your hands on the handlebars and remove your helmet." Slowly, Taylor barked. Raymond obeyed. Each finger moved with such control you could have counted the seconds. When the helmet came off, It revealed closely cropped silver hair and a face marked by time and battle. "Where you coming from?" Taylor snapped. No greeting, no explanation for the stop. "I live in Glenfield Heights," Raymond replied calmly. "Just out on my usual Sunday ride." "Is something wrong, officer?" Taylor raised an eyebrow. "That bike cost more than a year's rent around here. We had reports of Harley thefts near Sycamore Crest a few days ago. I see a guy I don't recognize, riding solo on a shiny bike. What do you think I'm supposed to do?" Officer Jalen Reddick, still standing behind, frowned. The theft reports were about new sport bikes. Matt, this one's vintage. And he wasn't speeding. Taylor didn't even look back. "Instinct," he repeated. "And don't forget who's lead on this shift." Raymond kept his voice steady. "All my papers are in order. Wallet's in the inner pocket of my jacket. I'll retrieve it if you allow." "Nice and slow," Taylor said, hand still close to his gun. "Just a wallet. Nothing else." Raymond pulled it out using 2 fingers. In the soft morning light, a plastic card slipped from the edge. His retired military ID. Taylor glanced at it, then frowned. "These things are easy to fake," he muttered, then turned to Reddick. "Watch him. I'm checking the bike." "We should confirm his ID first," Reddick offered, his voice growing more firm. "No," Taylor snapped, his eyes sharp with something deeper than suspicion. Prejudice. "I know this type. Always hiding something." As Taylor moved toward the Harley, Raymond stood still, arms relaxed at his sides. But inside him, old memories stirred. Other confrontations. False accusations. Moments when silence was treated like guilt. He didn't know. Within seconds, everything was about to spiral out of control. And not because he'd done anything wrong. Raymond Elias Ford stood quietly by the roadside, hands open, breath calm. At his feet, the 1986 Harley-Davidson Road King shimmered faintly in the soft Sunday light. The air carried a faint burnt scent, from dust, from tension, from something unnamed, but dangerously close. Officer Matthew Taylor began rifling through Raymond's bike with eagerness that felt more like hostility than protocol. His leather gloves yanked open the medical pouch, popped the document compartment, and rummaged through the personal storage as if raiding a criminal hideout. A small box holding a neatly folded American flag tumbled to ground, alongside a cloth pouch filled with commemorative military coins. Taylor didn't even glance down. He brushed them aside with the tip of his boot. "I told you, my insurance documents are under the seat," Raymond said, voice low but tense. "You already have my license and retired military ID. None of that." He gestured toward the scattered items. "Is evidence." Taylor looked up, eyes cold. "Who's running this inspection, huh?" Then, without warning, he stormed toward Raymond, his steps fast, his expression shifting from suspicion to something sharper. Anger. Maybe worse. Officer Jalen Reddick stepped forward. But before he could speak, Taylor grabbed Raymond's left wrist. "Stand still. You're resisting," Taylor shouted. The sudden bark of his voice sent a flock of sparrows shooting out of a nearby bush. Raymond stumbled. At 74, his body couldn't brace fast enough. The back of his head smacked hard against the edge of the patrol car door. Thud. A hollow sound, followed by a thin stream of blood trailing down his temple. "Jesus!" Reddick exclaimed, rushing over. "What are you doing?" He wasn't resisting. "I saw him move his hand. He could have been pulling a weapon," Taylor snapped, pinning Raymond down on the hood as he slapped cuffs onto his wrists. Blood from Raymond's forehead dripped onto the silver-white paint of the cruiser, mixing with a layer of week-old dust. Each drop felt like an insult, not to his rank, not to his medals, but to his skin. "I followed every instruction," Raymond gasped, his words rough in his throat. "There is nothing illegal in that bike. And the card you kicked, that was a legal military ID issued by the Department of Defense." Taylor didn't listen. Or rather, he didn't want to. Down the road, Naira Elston, a local elementary school teacher, had pulled over after visiting her mother. She sat frozen behind the wheel of her silver Ford Escape, eyes locked on the scene before her. And her fingers had just hit record. Naira Elston sat in silence, About 50 yards from the patrol car. Through the windshield, her heart pounded. This wasn't what she expected on a peaceful Sunday morning. An elderly man, handcuffed, blood running from his forehead. 2 officers, one furious, the other silent, scrambling around an old motorcycle, as if they had just caught a criminal mastermind. Naira Elston wasn't the type to chase danger. At 36, the elementary school teacher lived a quiet life, but something inside her snapped in that moment. She pulled out her phone, switched to Livestream, opened Patriot Watch stream, and typed a simple title. Happening now. Black senior being roughed up by cops near Hillstone Crossing. No clear reason. I'm in Wexley Borough on North Ridge Parkway, she said softly, voice steady, like she was calling a friend. There's an older black man in handcuffs, bleeding from the head. No clear reason why. I'm going to show this clearly so y'all can see for yourselves. The camera shook slightly as she zoomed in. Officer Matthew Taylor was pressing Raymond Ford against the hood. Blood still trickled from his scalp, soaking into the collar of his leather jacket. Next to him, Officer Jalen Reddick stood frozen, tore between duty and decency. In just 90 seconds, the live stream had over 300 viewers. Elsewhere, Dr. Elliot Granger, a surgeon at the Wexley Veterans Hospital, was finishing breakfast when a message came through. It was a link from Camille Reddick, his close friend and a nurse at the same hospital. Just one line. Elliot, you need to see this. It's him. He tapped the video. And for a moment, the world stopped. There he was, Colonel Raymond Elias Ford, his former commanding officer, the man who had saved his life during a hellish night in the Gulf War back in 1991. And now, that same man was bleeding on the side of a road, pinned down by a cop who'd never smelled war, never heard gunfire in the dark. Elliot didn't hesitate. He forwarded the video to Captain Desiree Holloway, Raymond's daughter, stationed just 45 miles away at Ashgate Hold. At the command center, Desiree had just finished a morning training session when her phone buzzed. A message from Elliot. Just one sentence. Des, it's your dad. Cops have him. Live stream. She opened the video, and the world as she knew it collapsed. On screen, sunlight slanted across her father's bloodied forehead. The blood was dark, familiar. She'd seen it on battlefields. And now, it stained American soil, drawn by the hands of those sworn to protect. A new low, a public insult to a military icon. As Taylor continued digging through the bike's compartments, he pulled out a display case. Inside, the Medal of Honor, still gleaming, the inscription clear. Colonel Raymond E. Ford. Taylor let out a scoff. If this thing's real, I'm the president. He spun the case in his hand like a cheap toy, then hurled it onto the Harley's seat. Glass shattered. For a flicker of a second, so brief it almost went unnoticed, Taylor paused, stared at the broken glass. Something in his face shifted. His hand clenched, then released. But instead of admitting anything, he turned away, took a deep breath, forced, shaky, swallowed his reaction. The blood on Raymond's temple had begun to dry, but in his chest, a fresh fracture had started to spread. Captain Desiree Holloway stepped out of the training center at Ashgate Hold, phone still in hand, live stream still playing. Her steps slowed, then stopped completely in the middle of the drill yard. On screen, her father's face, covered in blood. The Harley she grew up riding on behind him, the shattered metal case, the crimson soaking his jacket collar. No, this can't be, she whispered. But the image didn't lie. Just seconds later, Major Clayton Mercer was standing behind her. He didn't need to ask. One glance at the screen was enough. Your father? He asked, voice low and steady. Yes, sir. In handcuffs, bleeding, and one of the officers destroyed his medal, Desiree said, swallowing hard. I request immediate deployment of a rapid response unit. Mercer nodded without hesitation. Granted. Mobilize the team. Use Tier 1 personnel protection protocol. I'll report directly to General Silas Granger. 20 minutes later, 2 lines of dust-covered Humvees were ready at the base gates. Their engines roared in sync, like war drums sounding across a battlefield. Inside each vehicle sat volunteer soldiers, many of whom had once served under Raymond Ford. "I don't need an order. I need justice," said Sergeant Mason Clay, 47, as he stepped into a vehicle. "He pulled me out of gunfire in Fallujah. Now it's my turn to drive out and pull him back." Desiree Holloway sat in the command seat of the lead Humvee, eyes locked on the GPS. Her voice over the radio was sharp, focused. "All units, this is a protection mission, not an engagement. No weapons drawn, unless there's a clear threat. We're not here to start a war. We're here to reclaim dignity." Back on North Ridge Parkway, Officer Matthew Taylor had just lifted the shattered metal case from the ground when he heard it, a deep rumble. Low, building, like distant thunder. Officer Jalen Reddick looked up from his phone. The live stream now had over 7,000 viewers. "You hear that?" he asked, ears perked like pulled wires. "Probably just trucks," Taylor muttered, still smug. "Or maybe a fan club coming to back up the old man." But at that moment, over the horizon where Hillstone Crossing met the main road, a cloud of dust began to rise. Reddick squinted. "Those aren't civilian vehicles." Desiree rolled down the window of the lead Humvee as the convoy closed in. Her face was still, calm as glass before a storm, but in her eyes, fire burned. "This is Captain Desiree Holloway, United States Army," she said into the comms. "My father is being unlawfully detained. They don't know who he is, but they're about to." Dust whipped through the air behind 20 military vehicles as the rapid response team from Ashgate Hold approached North Ridge Parkway. Residents along the roadside stopped in their tracks. Some pulled out phones, filming what they could hardly believe. The convoy rolled straight across Hillstone Crossing. Tires slammed against pavement like the pounding of courtroom gavel strikes. Taylor turned, just in time to see the lead Humvee stop exactly 30 yards from the patrol car. The rest of the vehicles spread out in a half-moon formation, precise, unflinching. Not a single weapon was drawn, but 50 soldiers stepped out in perfect unison, stood tall, silent, and it was that silence, disciplined and unshaken, that became the loudest warning of all. Reddick froze. Somewhere along the way, his hand had drifted away from his holster, his eyes locked on the woman approaching. Steely gaze, immaculate uniform, captain's insignia gleaming on her shoulder. Desiree Holloway. "What the hell?" Taylor murmured. Desiree stopped, exactly 15 paces from the patrol car and Taylor. No yelling, no arguing. Her voice rang out, steady, loud enough for the soldiers behind her to hear. "Officer Taylor, the man you're unlawfully detaining is Colonel Raymond Elias Ford, commander of Operation Desert Ember, recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor, and my father." Taylor stumbled back, half a step. His face paled. Beads of sweat rolled down his collar, despite the mild autumn air. "Wait, what?" he stammered. There was no info saying he was military. Desiree pointed sharply to the ground. "His military ID is under your car, after you kicked it like a grocery store coupon." Before Taylor could reply, another siren rose from beyond the convoy. A Wexley Borough Police SUV rolled up, its red lights slicing the midday sky. The door swung open. Sheriff Ronald Beckett, 58, stepped out, his sun-weathered face now tight with fury. "What the hell is going on here?" Beckett demanded, scanning Taylor, Reddick, then Desiree, until his eyes landed on the silver-haired man in cuffs. Blood dried along his temple. He knew that face. Anyone in Georgia's military or law enforcement circles knew Raymond Ford. "Remove the cuffs. Right now," Beckett ordered. No hesitation. No discussion. Taylor stood frozen. "I said again, clearly, remove the cuffs. Now." Reddick stepped forward. He pulled the key from his belt and gently unlocked the restraints. Raymond slowly lowered his arms. Each movement carried the controlled grace of a man who'd once endured torture and never broke. Sheriff Beckett approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Colonel Ford, I apologize. I can't excuse what happened here today. An internal investigation will begin immediately, and I give you my word, it won't be swept under the rug." Raymond simply looked at him. No nod, no shake of the head, no forgiveness, no condemnation. His silence, with 50 soldiers behind him, was louder than any battle cry. The noonday sun poured down on North Ridge Parkway, now transformed into a battlefield of stillness. Everyone stood motionless. Police, soldiers, stunned civilians, waiting as if for a bell that hadn't yet rung. Colonel Raymond Elias Ford sat on the bench inside a Humvee, being treated by a medic. A white bandage circled his forehead. His eyes cold steel. Farther back, Naira Elston's phone was still live streaming, still recording. Not a single frame missed. At exactly 12:04 p.m., a ringtone buzzed in Sheriff Ronald Beckett's earpiece. "It's from the governor's office," he said quietly, stepping away to take the call. 2 minutes later, he returned, expression unreadable. "The Department of Justice and the State Bureau of Investigation have been notified," he announced, then turned to Matthew Taylor. "And your actions this morning have officially been classified as a serious violation of protocol and professional conduct." A new twist. The mask slips. At that moment, another voice called out from behind the patrol car. It was Officer Jalen Reddick. In his hand was a small recording device, not standard issue. A personal backup cam he often used when working shifts with Taylor. "Sheriff," Reddick said, voice firm despite the slight tremble in his hand, "I have a recording of the entire incident. Clear, uncut, from the moment the Harley was pulled over to when Colonel Ford's head was slammed against a patrol car. Every eye turned toward him. Taylor always tells me not to activate the body cam unless absolutely necessary. But this morning, I had a bad feeling, so I turned on my personal backup cam." Sheriff Beckett's jaw clenched. "Hand it over. And thank you, Reddick. You just saved yourself from a lifetime of silent regret." Taylor lunged forward. "What the hell are you doing, Reddick? You turning your back on your partner?" "No," Reddick replied, eyes locked on him. "I'm turning back toward what the word partner is supposed to mean." Hours later, at the Wexleyboro Police Department, Taylor sat upright in the command office, face to face with Sheriff Beckett and an internal affairs officer. "Hand over your weapon. And your badge," Beckett ordered. Taylor let out a bitter chuckle, but didn't argue. He placed his Glock on the desk, then removed his badge. The sound of metal hitting would echo through the room. "You are hereby suspended, effective immediately, pending criminal investigation for abuse of authority, physical assault of a civilian, racial misconduct, and destruction of evidence." The internal affairs officer added, "Reddick's recording and the live stream, which now has over 900,000 views, have already been submitted to the state prosecutor's office." Taylor's fists clenched. "I follow my instincts, cop's intuition." "No!" Beckett cut him off. "You didn't act on instinct. You acted on bias. And this morning, you kicked a national icon in the face without even knowing who he was." Outside the station, a quiet crowd had gathered. They weren't shouting. They weren't waving signs. They simply stood still, some holding flags, some wearing old service jackets. Many were veterans. They didn't yell when Taylor walked out under escort. They just stared, cold, like history itself watching a chapter come to its end. 1 week later, the front lawn of the Colonel Ford Veteran Center, south of Wexleyboro, was packed. News cameras lined the sidewalks. Veteran groups stood quietly beneath fluttering flags, holding signs that read, "Honor doesn't need permission. Justice wears no uniform. We stand with Raymond Ford." Local broadcasters, national reporters, even foreign correspondents were present. A single photograph had gone viral. Raymond Ford, seated beside his Harley Davidson, white bandage across his forehead, eyes locked onto the camera, cutting through every layer of bias. It had become a symbol. When the microphone was finally offered to him, Raymond Elias Ford looked forward, then slowly shook his head. "I'm not here to give a speech," he said, voice rough but steady. "And I'm not a hero. I'm just a citizen trying to get home." The crowd fell silent. I shouldn't need a medal, or a uniform, or a convoy of Humvees, or a daughter in fatigues. To be treated like a human being, All I ask for is basic respect. That press conference stopped millions of Americans in their tracks. Channel 14, Patriot Watch Stream, cut its regular programming to replay his words. One comment beneath the video read, "We're witnessing a new Martin Luther King, not with a microphone, but with a calm that made the whole nation listen." That same week, the Wexley Borough Police Oversight Committee announced 5 official reform measures. 1. Mandatory installation of flux signal drive on all body cams to prevent unauthorized shutoffs. 2. Creation of an independent civilian review board with authority to access internal footage. 3. Automatic termination for any officer caught tampering with or disabling recording devices. 4. Increased funding for racial bias training and de-escalation tactics. 5. A formal written apology to Colonel Raymond Elias Ford, along with the establishment of a military scholarship in his name, for young men and women of color. When asked on live television how it felt to become a symbol of justice, Raymond only offered a dry smile. No one wants to become a symbol because they were mistreated, but if it means one more soldier, one more old man, or someone grieving in silence gets treated with dignity, I'll carry that weight. And that was what he left his country. An old motorcycle, a wound that hadn't fully healed, and a truth too clear to ignore. Honor never goes out of style. 3 weeks later, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, Colonel Raymond Elias Ford was wiping a thin layer of dust from his 1986 Harley-Davidson Road King inside the garage in Glenfield Heights. He worked slowly, each motion like the rhythm of an old song. A song made of steel, oil, and freedom. A knock at the door. Not loud, not rushed. Raymond opened it. Standing there, Officer Jalen Reddick, dressed in plain clothes. No gun, no badge, and beside him, someone Raymond hadn't expected to see again, Matthew Taylor. On the drive to Glenfield Heights, Taylor had pulled over, sat on the side of the road for a long time. He'd replayed the Livestream for the 10th time. The shaky frame, the drip of blood on the patrol car hood, those steady eyes that didn't flinch under force. In the rear view mirror, he saw himself, the officer who once believed gut instinct was a shield. But it wasn't. It was a mask, one that had fear and prejudice. Taylor bowed his head, said nothing for a few long seconds. "I'm not here to explain," he finally said, voice hoarse. "I'm here to apologize." The air thickened, heavy like the sky before a storm. Reddick stepped back, leaving the 2 men alone. No ranks, no uniforms. Taylor reached into his pocket, pulled out a wrinkled envelope. Inside, a handwritten letter, the words shaky but sincere. He handed it to Raymond without pressure. "I looked at you that day," Taylor said, eyes red, "and I didn't see a person. I saw what I was trained to distrust. And that was my failure." Raymond didn't lecture. He didn't offer forgiveness in words. He just looked deep into the man's eyes and said, "If you truly want to change, then do it with actions, not flowers, not speeches." And the action came. The following Sunday morning, the largest motorcycle procession in Wexley Borough's history assembled at Patriot Park. Nearly 1,000 people, all races, all professions, all generations, showed up. Some carried American flags. Some wore old unit patches. Some were veterans. Some had never even sat on a motorcycle. Desiree Holloway led the procession, wearing olive green uniform and an old Army helmet marked Ford. Behind her, Raymond, his Harley rolled gently, its engine humming like a prayer, as they rode across North Ridge Parkway, the place where he had once been dragged down and bloodied. Every rider honked their horn in unison. The sound echoed through the hills, like a new national anthem written in steel and respect. Locals stood along the roadside, waving flags and holding handmade signs. "Ford strong. Justice doesn't need a uniform. No one rides alone anymore." In the crowd, an 8-year-old boy in a toy soldier's helmet stood at salute. Beside him, his white-haired grandmother, hands trembling, held up a handwritten sign. "I'm sorry we failed you." Her eyes glistened, but she stood proud, watching the motorcycles roll past, as if decades of silence were being washed away by the thunder of engines. In a time of noise and division, that ride wasn't just a tribute. It was a declaration that a 74-year-old man could still teach an entire town how to listen, how to apologize, and how to move forward together. Autumn returned to Wexley Borough with light winds rustling the old maple trees along Glenfield Avenue, their golden leaves resting on the stone steps like a soft memory. A full year had passed since that morning on Northridge Parkway, but its echoes still lingered. Colonel Raymond Elias Ford rarely spoke to the press. He never opened a social media account, never wrote a memoir, and yet his name and his quiet defiance became the first chapter in training manuals at police academies across Georgia. At the Wexley Borough Police Department, a new memorial plaque now hangs in the main hall. It shows a still frame from the Livestream, Ford standing tall, eyes unwavering, even as his hands were cuffed behind his back. Beneath the photo are these words: "You don't need a uniform to have dignity. You just need to be seen as human." His story led to 3 state-level reforms, including formation of an independent community oversight board, implementation of an officer ethics scoring system, mandatory training program titled The Ford Protocol, knowing when to listen instead of command. Captain Desiree Holloway, who once led the ride, now oversees that very program, teaching new cadets that power is not a weapon, but a responsibility to protect trust. One quiet Sunday afternoon, Ford returned to Valley Rest Memorial Grounds, but not to be restrained. This time he stood at his wife's grave, Helen Ford, the woman who once said, "We don't choose how we leave this world, but we can choose what we leave behind." In his hands, a bouquet of lavender wrapped in old newspaper, just like Helen used to place by the kitchen window. He didn't speak, but his breath was steady, and his eyes no longer carried anger. In the distance, the sound of motorcycles echoed again. A new generation was gathering, this time not to protest, but to show they'd learned. And so, Colonel Ford's legacy was never in a shout, but in a silence strong enough to make an entire system listen. From the story of Colonel Raymond Elias Ford, we didn't just witness a man stripped of honor. We saw how he used his calm and dignity to hold a mirror to the system. He didn't scream. He didn't retaliate. He just stood still and let the truth speak for itself. The lesson is clear. You don't need power to do what's right. You don't need rage to be heard. Sometimes the right silence speaks louder than any speech. This story isn't just about Mr. Ford. It's a reminder that we all have a role in protecting one another's dignity. Whether you're a retired soldier, a teacher, a bus driver, or just someone walking by, every act of kindness matters. If this story moved you, leave a comment and share your thoughts. Send this video to someone who needs hope. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. 7 Stories, where every story carries a message of justice, dignity, and belief in doing what's right. Because sometimes, one story told at the right time can change how the world sees everything.